Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And I want to say a hello, happy Sunday to those who are watching Beat Live. We're back today to our fourth discussion around the topics found in the Adolescence and Life, a book by spiritual author Joanna de Angelis. If you have not read this book yet, you may decide to do so after watching this video. I hope this is a good invitation, and I extend this invitation to teenagers, to parents, and to educators. It is my personal opinion as a parent, also as a Christian and a Spiritist, that the content found in this book is not only urgent, it is unavoidable for all of us. And if we keep working on our topics of today, we're going to go over roughly 5 chapters centered in social life of a teenager today. As you can see, we talk about chapters 11 to 15, the adolescent social life, social critical age and identity crisis of the adolescents, the influence of media, social media, and all media, and relationships outside the home. And my personal favorite, which is the chapter about being versus having during this time. But let's go ahead and get started talking in earnest. And as I begin to discuss, I see that um, social life, right? As we start to talk about all aspects of a social life of a teenagers, I see that we need to define or redefine of what does it mean today, now, in this day and age. What can we do to define what is that social life of a teenager, right? It is certainly not what defined my own adolescent years before social media and mobile devices were a reality to me. But let's go ahead and get moving here. And I would like to take a moment to talk a little bit about the aspects as it pertains in the book, as it we find in the book about the teenager's social life. If we go back to maybe some atemporal definitions, right? Social life during a teenager's life is all about what? A single phenomenon that I can call transformations, right? Transformations that are coming in all shapes of forms and how they will transform a teenager's feelings, emotions, the life of a teenager, and their behaviors, uh, after all, right? But if I think about it and I remote to the time when I was a teenager and I was going through some similar transitions, right? The transition that can be best expressed as a transition between being a child and becoming an adult. What did I like? Who would I prefer to be around in those years? And as we ask these questions, we are confronted with a very, very logical answer. I would much rather be around people going through, at a minimum, a similar experience than me. People at my own age, those that were dealing with this accelerated and sometimes abrupt pace of changes that I was going through, and how those changes impacted my interests, my own definitions, and all those discoveries that I was now opening myself to find. Once upon a time, I would have enjoyed friends and childhood games and that childhood context that made me who I was. Now, as a teenager, I don't even recognize what used to be, my aspirations, my goals, etc. So, if you think about it from the perspective of the teenager, let's flip a little bit about the to the parent. For a parent, this is indeed confusing at a minimum. right? As a parent, I'm like, oh, teenager, my child that now is a teenager, they know what they like to do. They know what type of activities, the sports, their friends, everything has this sense of stability that you can tell who they are, you can define, and you're very comfortable with it. Well, that is no longer the case for a parent and for the teenager. And it is certainly not true to the teenagers that who they are, right, is certain. No, it's not. And as all teenagers, this is globally, as we know, as all teenagers out there in the world change their behavior socially as a result of all those transformations that are going through inside of them, they must also, and this is really key here, confirm what is their own sense of who they are and becoming and I'm going to use a word that is not in the book, but androgynous, right? A child, a baby, all those traits of being men or women are very confusing or not well defined. At the teenage years, it's an imperative that each one of us come to sense with our own masculinity, femininity. So I just can think when I say that of the raging hormones that come and plague our sense of centeredness. But if you think about it, as we are gripped by what can be an overwhelming desire, this is push to discover oneself, there is at the same time it's at the same time, right? It's very simultaneous, quite strong sense of loss. And what I mean by that is the sense of loss of what once defined me and that equally strong, right, desire to belong and be part of something new, a new group of people from a social perspective that we're talking about, but belong to a new something, including the new group of people that perhaps can better define all the emotional upheavals that I'm going through. So it is important to reflect upon as we speak to this. Pause and reflect to the sense that there are vast differences of upbringings, and the differences reflect, cultural, social, economical status, so on and so forth, right? Each one of us are a result of our particular village, if you will, our particular tribe, our subculture of our family. Our parents may allow more or less independence based on this variables, where they from, where they are, the color that a family unit is right now at the moment of my teenage years. So back to the book, I just wanted to remind us that Joanna recommends us to all of us, parents, educators, etc., that we should understand and we should support the teenagers very challenging time, and our role is to help them develop their own sense of self, their own self discovery path, their own, and I say this with, I would say, bold capital letters, their own existential project. It is at this point that I say this is understanding who you are in that immortal spirit, right? That continuum that is from one life to the next, from one transition to the next. That existential project that we have for this life is really key. And yes, it's another variable of many, many that we're going through. So, how to do that? For parents, for educators, for friends, for people like me that is talking now after reading this book, it is really all about providing a space, providing that space for the teenagers to find their own voice, to find their own aspirations. I I mentioned as a child, you have your aspiration, but as a teenager, those childish, if you will, those infant, child, even preteen aspirations start to shift. So let's provide a space to find the new aspirations. Let's provide a space for, say, dialogues where the real authority of a parent, an educator, etc., whatever your role is, comes from acceptance and not judgment. And allow the relationship with our teenagers to become one of companionship and allyship. Historically speaking, each generation, as we know, has its own challenges, has its own demands. It is all about that little tiny law that defines everything we based on our thought processes within the body of work of Spiritism. That little law called the law of progress. It's about progress, it's about growth, and it's also about adaptation and individual and societal progress. What are some of the quote unquote dangers our teenagers may find while they're discovering their voice, while they're exploring their own new, often uncharted territory? Well, the big ones that those plague me as a parent are substance abuse, which can be in the form of alcohol, drugs, or any other escape mechanism, right? Delinquency, yes, I may be dared to follow a certain subgroup that their rite of passage is, I don't know, steal or hurt somebody else's feelings. I don't know. Those are just thought process really really quickly here, but there's some sort of delinquency in the behaviors, and anything that from a dare perspective or new uncharted territory are just risky overall. Oh my. It is so hard for anyone going through this. Everyone is impacted. The gradual freedom that comes with the cognitive abilities or the relative independence, and I'm talking about, I'm a teenager, and in the context that I live here in the US, I am, say 16, 15, 16. I now have my first car, my first job. In my case, I'm a girl, so I have my first, I don't know, my first partner, my first deep friend, my first boyfriend, whatever. That gradual freedom that comes as a teenager means that parents are no longer as strong in define and limit their lives, right? And parents are no longer first in line to guide and limit their behaviors. So at that point, I would like to remind something that Joanna says in this book. Joanna tells us, or she reminds us, that parents, and this is really important for all of you who is a parent of a teenager, the parent's ideal situation, ideal, the best is that during this period of self-discovery, your teenager practices safe sex, that your teenager creates new social network with good friends, good companions that match their own sense of self, that they are indeed able to identify and create the connection with their deep self. So that means that teenagers will need to know, well, who they are, what do they want, and how they want to go about achieving it. So if we shift back to the idea of social life, we know that this is not simple at all. Family life should be the place for safety and love, right? And at the same time, I am going, looking, attaining new friends in a new setting, which is a different beast altogether. We are unfortunately bombarded with what I call prefabricated models of what good looks like, right? Good can be the perfect body type, or good may be that socially accepted behavior. And if we think about it, one must look out for all the empty relationships that me as a teenager may be forging, may be creating. And those empty relationships may contain inherent in its very superficial type of bonds, inherent emotional, verbal, or physical abuse or physical violence. And one must also look for their own sense of strength, the sense of strength to say no to things that doesn't feel right, that may violate my sense of what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong, even when I'm redefining those for myself. And the opposite, of course, is true, right? I say this because I think about the yin and yang, the confrontation that exists between one generation to the other, right? One group or subgroup of people versus the other. And with my background in art history, I just immediately think about impressionist painters. Yes, impressionist painters and paintings that are worth in the millions of dollars and have entire museums and books about them. They were once considered radicals, right? If we move forward about 100 years later, the so-called hippie generation, known for fighting for nonviolence and fighting for love, were considered degenerates. So, if we think about it and we go back to the role of parent and educator, we really have this conundrum. We must teach what? Happiness, peace, critical thinking, non judgment, respect, forgiveness to all, as these should be the guiding lights to these turbulent waters that we as teenagers once navigated, or our children and grandchildren will navigate. So, with that, I say adolescent socialization is a very, you know, difficult, long path. And if you are close to those that are going through that, follow those paths, these paths with care, with love, and with interest. So I continue in the book, and we talk a little bit about this critical age, and that critical age, adolescence, leads to a notion of identity crisis. And as we continue to discuss the complexities of being a teenager, one area that is I consider super super important, one of the most complex of all, is the sense of achieving one's own identity. And I'm going to digress a little bit, forgive me for that, but I was reading an article about Wednesday. Yes, the newest installment of the Adams Family adaptation in movie in a series in Netflix. And I read that it has become so popular and in some cases has become a viral sensation. And I thought to myself, Wednesday, right? The character in the story proclaims, and this is a big self proclamation, I am not a freak. I am a force of nature. That's what Adams Wednesday Adams says. And it's important for us to think about it in the context of this discussion about teenager. She is a teenager in that case, but feeling different than everyone else, right? And she's different, very important to say this, in an already one of a kind family, the Adams, and different within that in a school for outcasts. Oh my. So this movie is all about a teenager trying to make sense of the world around her. She, and I believe this is why this movie has become, or this series, I'm sorry, has become such a sensation right now, because she represents individualism, freedom, creativity, and the ability to question. And this is really key, right? This character questions norms within norms within norms. Being cool for Wednesday is almost so natural, because she is an agent of chaos. She disrupts everything that's already disrupted, and she's not concerned about being accepted or not. She is there to accept herself. And I love that this movie and this character is a reminder to all of us to stick to what we truly believe, because it is the bravest thing we can do. But is this really realistic to all of us? Let's think about it. When everything is changing, we are at a minimum confused. We don't know who we are, what our true self is. Adding to that, society is changing. What is and what is not acceptable changes on a such a fast pace. How do I then find my own identity, my identity within a social group that could, but mostly should fit my true north? And as I pause to reflect on that, I come to the sense of identity, right? What is identity? It is the result of values that enable the perception of the self. I'm going to repeat that. Identity, the definition of identity, is the result of values that enable the perception of the self. That means that my identity makes me unique. I am unique, which means I'm different from everyone else out there. And according to Joanna in the literature, the self should be in balance or in equilibrium and integrated, meaning whole, right? You, in your sense of self, should have balance and peace, and you feel whole, not fragmented. So when I hear that, when I read that, I come to terms with the fact that this means that For a teenager to develop her or his own sense of self, it means that the teenager must know that he or she feels uniquely individual, right? Very, very different in its own world. And it must also feel integrated with one's personal identity throughout one's life. So the self should be known to me and to the others. So the more you are, you have a sense of integrity with your own definition who you are and how the others perceive you, we are becoming this process becomes easy. So this is really key for anyone trying to understand what Joanna calls the global sense of the ego's characterization. Ooh, a lot of words here. So let's pause to talk about the Johari's window. And this is a psychological tool, and I just want to spend a few moments to bring it to you. You can always look at it and see that it is at a minimum hard for you to understand yourself because within the whole of the human identity, we can break it down into four parts: the open self, which is what everybody knows about me, the blind spot, what people know, but I don't know about myself, the hidden self, my shadow, those that I hide from everybody, including perhaps myself, and the unconscious, the unknown self. So it's really cool because what we see here is that this tool helps point the way to looking for opportunities perhaps to know oneself and knowing that most of us, teenager or not, may not really know the whole, the sum of the parts that makes who we are. So self-perception may be influenced and because of it generate this confusion to your sense of identity. And if we add to the problem of self-discovery, continuity, and self image construction, it is difficult. So let's talk a little bit more about identity because the concept of identity varies, as I mentioned before. It varies by country, by culture, by heritage. And the issue is during the search to finding oneself, and that search is fueled by a need in this time frame to break free from what is known and what is quote unquote my past. It is within this context that the individual and the collective identity is formed. What we need to be aware, again, as parents and educators, is that this process will be easier or harder depending on two things basically the teenager's psychological state, and we're talking about are you strong psychologically speaking, or are you weak, or your cognitive ability, are you resilient, or you are more of somebody who assimilates versus maintains its own strength. So if you think about it, there are so many obstacles that would otherwise be a simple process. What are they? Well, let's think about it. The interruption of the process of identity construction. And we're talking about anything, could be maybe the family, there's a tremendous loss or disruption of location where you live, or a family member passes. I don't know. There's so many things that make come and interrupt a teenager's life right in the middle of the process of constructing one's identity. And that may lead or push the teenager to a premature definition of one's self image that may be not, forgive me for saying this, but not fully baked definition. Another obstacle is really, it's all about the immaturity that is part of this time, this immature self awareness, which really just means I don't know enough, I'm not aware enough, therefore I am dependent on how you and you and you out there see me. So there is this over reliance on what people think about who I am. Um, Interesting enough, another obstacle Joanna brings about is a strong, so strong identification with either the father or the mother that may hinder the process of identification. Oh my goodness, it's everywhere, right? And the other area that Joanna brings to us is the fact that if I have a too strong identification with my parents or no sense of identification on the other end of spectrum, I have never created a sense of connection with my family. My initial social group may lead to a very weak and not well adapted identity because I'm breaking free from something that I don't even have well established. And finally, but a really difficult one to talk about is actually in the midst of establishing your own identification and establishing your sexual identity when you do have conflicting sexual identification. And it doesn't matter what is the root cause for that, but that the premature sexual identity may conflict with the need for a strong psychological preparation that I may not have as a teenager against all the stressors that come with that. I'm talking about the full spectrum of sexual identification here. So, a mature identity, self identity, will lead to a very strong and high self esteem, which is expressed by tolerance toward others and behaviors that are not stereotypical, right? And those teenagers are strong and they face challenges with strength and determination. So, as a summary of this discussion, we find that adolescence is a critical time for the adaptation and definition of one's behavior and one's reality. If we feel different from other people around us, it is a question of how do I fight to recognize how should I act? Or how should identify resources out there? And by resources, I mean people that are my allies. What are types of knowledge that I need to seek to become stronger in my decision making? What are the tools, the systems, etc.? All of those resources are available, and we teenagers need to know that we it's a fight, it's a challenge, but let's look for our tools to overcome them. And so the shock between the old, right, and the new, and by that I mean the old generation and the new generation. I also mean my childhood and my adulthood. This shock between those two polar opposite areas of oneself is challenging. It's challenging to everyone. And at the same time, this is truly a unique and rich moment in everyone's life that Joanna tells us, and I stamp approval on her testimony. It will lead to happiness and fulfillment as an adult. As I continue to talk, we're now going to talk a little bit about the media, right? And the process of identification to the adolescent's life. Social media here, right, is the elephant in the room. In a world that changes, and I'm talking about significantly changes every second, it is rather challenging to understand and adapt to the norm when it shifts. And I'm talking about every minute, right? This is important to notice because we know how everything around us when we're going through our own adolescence is met with our own sense of insecurity, our own sense of worry, and even panic. The future for us teenagers is unrecognizable, and the present is strange at a minimum. So, when parents try to provide guidance, and they do that without respect, without love, they will push their teenager away from the family, perhaps earlier than they're ready to do so. And the problem is when we do this, guidance may come from others, and mostly from others that are equally immature. So, parents, I ask you, I beg you, and so does Joanna de Angelis, please don't transfer the ownership of raising and loving your teenagers to others. And what I mean is transferring the that raising and guidance and orientation and loving of your teenager to the new social network, and that network be not, just do not be unaware. That network is not the neighbor, but it's also anyone that is at the other side of the screen of, a laptop, a tablet, or any mobile device, right? So we, parents and educators, we need to learn to be interested. We need to care, to be very caring, and we need to do this without judgment, without impatience or intolerance. And the end result may be a place and a time that is known for conflicts, right? Aggression, violence, disrespect, and worse if we don't. And I say this and I'm smiling because this is just about every cartoon or sitcom or movie about teenagers out there. And it's highly disseminated by the media that the stereotypical teenager are what? Ah, selfish, indifferent, rebellious, reckless, and even revengeful. And I say this, and I start to think about, is this good? Is it bad? Is it good or evil? And my mind goes straight into the Marvel superhero as the embodiment of good, and every supervillain out there is the embodiment of evil. And I also, my mind goes into good is also represented in the media as beautiful, right? And I say, social media, patterns of good and bad, patterns of good equal beautiful, as defined by patterns that are not sustainable, right? And we teenagers, and I say this especially girls, but it's really gender neutral here, models of beauty that is so unsustainable by moderation in how much you eat, what you eat, and how much of everything you have to have your body undergo. And the opposite, the bad, is anything deemed ugly simply by being outside of the norms, right? So, why do I say that? I talked about stereotypes, I talked about other stereotypes, and I see all of this being portrayed and given to us in every possible channel or medium. And I say, my wish is that dignity, a sense of healthy intimacy, harmony, respect, courage, consciousness, those are the behaviors that should be portrayed in the media at large. My inspiration is that a young, courageous teenager, and it happens to be the climate change activist Greta Thunberg, be our model, right? And if you look at her biography, briefly, I say that she, Greta, gained worldwide fame for being courageous and calling out on world leaders to do more to stop the effects of, in her case, climate change. She was only 17 years of age, and she has inspired so many when at that time she founded the school strike for climate, and she was nominated for Nobel Prize, and she has won the prize for humanity, the first time that it was ever awarded. So all this for a teenager with Asperger's syndrome, notably OCD, and with mutism as a mental state. She, Greta, will be 20 next January, and I wish she continues to inspire others like she has inspired me. And I say there are many, many idols today that inspire our teenagers, activists like Greta, but you find them in sports, in the arts, and in the social media, right? So it is up to us, to all of us, to understand the paradox of values that are available to everyone via this very, very powerful way to communicate. And I say that because it's super fragmented. It comes from every channel, and it's highly visual and beautiful. And as we know, a picture is worth a thousand words, but those values are there, but we should think of them and be able to create a room for critical thinking, right? So that we can find those who match our aspirational goals. I don't have much time left, so let's almost wrap it up. We're now talking a little bit about relationships outside the home. Yes, creating a circle of relationships is key to all of us, as we are social beings. The sense of belonging is enormous, it's critical to all of us. But what we need to be aware is how strong, mature, and deep those relationships should be outside of the home of a teenagers. And I say that because it's important for us to remember that when parents are going through their own conflicts, many, right? It could be divorce, it could be, I don't know, financial conflicts and stress, it could be a growing family or a diminishing family. I don't know, but we all go through conflicts. But when parents are going through their own conflicts, home and family life may become the battleground for all sorts of hurt, all sorts of aggression. And it's important for us to remember that because our teenagers are the immediate victim in this scenario. Parents should support instead of throwing the teenager out to seek solace to their insecurities, their fears, and all sorts of conflicts outside of the home. And yes, I said they will. It's an impulse, but let's not push them before they're ready. And if that is the only option, right, to seek solace outside of my own family, what would be an ideal environment to me? Well, my ideal environment is a deep and environment full of caring relationships, an environment where I can find a place for understanding, that I see and I have room for communicating and my own thoughts and my own questions. This is my ideal world. The need for my personal identification will push me as a young adult to first and foremost, and this is nature, right? To mistrust anything that is familiar to me. So it is because of that the parents that are controlling and dominating on one hand, and or indifferent and disrespectful on the other, they directly impact the teenager and their ability to mature. Some coping mechanism for the teenagers are, and you may laugh when I say this because it is, yes, stereotypical, right? Rebellious. And it's okay to be rebellious, but it does not be means that it's a bad thing. Just be watch out that my rebellion may lead potentially to violence. Another mechanism for my drive as a teenager to break free may be the opposite, right? I'm resigned. I don't have a voice. I'm going through my own angst and alert. This may potentially lead to sadness, depression, or even a depersonalized behavior. The other one is, which very similar to the either resigned or rebellious, is the I become uncommunicative, and here is so important for us to be aware of it because potentially it may lead to some sort of a mental illness, starting with neurosis or so on and so forth. So I say this, and I just want us to pause to think about some aspects of individual clashes are also easy to see when they become generational clashes. Example are the 50s. So, what characterized the generation of young ones? It was a generation that came out of a world war, World War II, and faced a world in conflict. And that generation became very known for its silent, its own silence, and was very uncommunicative generation. 10 years later in the 60s, we find what's called the desperate generation. And it is so called desperate because they were victims of the constant threat of total destruction through nuclear war. And two very different, right? One very silent and resigned, the other very desperate because it's the end of the world. So I'm not going to continue with that, but this is a call to action for all of us, right? All of us should think about this is difficult, this is challenging, but our call to action is to offer a strong foundation in our families to our children, no matter what age, so that when they look for their new relationships outside the home, they're able to identify those that best match their values. We need to think about that we need to commit to offer a sense of security, a sense of understanding in our home and family environment so that our teenagers can better navigate outside of that home in their time of transition. They are the new Greta Thunbergs and Wednesdays of this generation, and they will forge ahead and they will help create a more stable and peaceful world. I come to the very end, and I said this is my favorite chapter of this series of chapters in the book, being and having. And this is as it relates, of course, to our teenage years. And this is a great topic because it is with a sense of almost sadness that we have to realize that we live in a society that is increasingly obsessed with having instead of being. So it is with that that is important for us to stop a few minutes just to talk about it. What are our values? How do I express them? And I quote Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King, Martin Luther, so many centuries ago, when he said, "Show me where a man spends his time and money, and I'll show you his God." And I love that quote because we have to think about it. How and how much do I invest in things that are make my priority, right? That are my time, my investment of money, of time, of energy, and they become my God. So, as I say this, I remote to Joanna's reminder that the value contemporary society has is based on power and possessions, right? We compete, we are cruel, we are inhumane, and we are driven in this society of that is based in power in possession. We are driven to be the best, most visible, and to have the most trophies. And I ask you, what could be our trophies? What should be our everlasting trophy? And as we think of that, let's think how we can switch from having to being. What are our spiritual needs when everything seems to be this battle, this confrontation between opportunity and power? Those of us, I'm saying teenage or not, who are perhaps able to be more mature, that are emotionally, psychologically, perhaps more aware, and awaken to the pursuit of ethical values, of knowledge, of personal growth. We are the ones who are in the moment, who are being, who are concerned and attaining to the being, the self. So the act of being is so meaningful and significant, isn't it? And I part today by saying and inviting all of us, including myself, to be strong, to be courageous, to persevere, to see the wisdom of self sufficiency, to see the wisdom of adjustments, of creating, constructing a space for creating our own identity, and remember that we are immortal beings. So as we confront our challenges which is this, the big one here today is this seeking the sense of self. Let's confront them with optimism. Let's develop our emotional intelligence and learn how to identify the emotions of others so that we can stay serene, stay peaceful amidst the chaos of becoming an adult. Thank you for your time today. I'll see you next week. Bye bye.